by Priya Krishnan, who is the Chief Digital and Transformation Officer at Bright Horizons, and she's joining us from Boston. And pleasure to have you, Priya. And before I let you take the floor, let me have the pleasure of introducing you for our audience. Priya comes with a very, very illustrious experience, and she has been the founder of Founding Years Learning Solution Private Limited, and Clay, which is India's leading childcare and schooling service provider with over 150 owned, company-owned and company-operated centers across Bangalore, Hyderabad, Mumbai, NCR, Pune, and Chennai. And she started the company with the intent of enabling women to get back to work post childbirth. With this in mind, she provides high quality childcare services on site for corporates like Unilever, ITC, L'Oreal, Johnson and Johnson, Airtel, and among others. They also work with the corporates and near workplace models and help them with creating solutions for the employees through subsidies and underwriting, like in the case of Accenture, IBM, Flipkart, etc. With 9 years of operations behind them and 11,000 plus children under their care, what differentiates them is transparency, flat organizational structure, and most importantly, empowered center staff. She has worked across the world prior to moving to India, and right now, like I said, she's working out of Boston to start up Clay, and that experience has stood her and her team in good stead. And like I said, she comes with a very illustrious experience. She has been with Bright Horizons in three different capacities. Firstly, with the Senior Vice President, Client Relations. Secondly, as Chief Client and Experience Officer. And for the last 2 months, she has been working as the Chief Digital and Transformation Officer at the same company. And prior to this, she was also with, like I said, Founding Years Learning Solution Private Limited for almost about 1 year. And then Clay, where she was the founder and CEO for 8 years and 11 months. And before that, she was with Memphis, UK, where she worked for 5 years in different capacity, last one being Vice President. And before that, she also worked as a sales leader at EDS for 4 years, and as assistant vice president at Bangalore Labs, and a senior consultant at PwC Consulting. And she's going to talk to us a very, very interesting and I would say very emotive topic on how to bring back women to the workforce, especially after what we have gone through during pandemic and even before that, right? I think given the number of the women workforce that we get to see across Indian companies, I think this is a very, very important topic, and I'm sure we will have very actionable insights, I would say, from her brief talk to us. And I'm sure we will have, like I said, very, very interesting insights as well. Over to you, Priya.
Thank you. It's really nice meeting all of you. I have a presentation that I'm about to share. But thank you for the introduction, Dr. Nagendra, and it's a pleasure meeting with all of you. It is a truly important topic and one that's very close to my heart. So I look forward to speaking for about 25-30 minutes and then opening up the floor for any questions. So from my perspective, I think one of the things I want to first talk about is the why. We all talk about women workforce participation, but why specifically is this relevant? And in the Indian context, what does this mean? The women workforce participation in India is, I think, at an all-time low in the past 12, 13 years. It's at 19.23%, and this is down from 21% pre-pandemic. This is the bottom 20 percentile of the world. So clearly, it is both. You can think about it as a problem, but also think about it as an incredible opportunity, because there is an untapped part of the population that can be brought into the workforce. I've always believed India has had the largest demographic dividend, both in terms of a young population, but also young children. The economic case for having women in the workforce is a very important one. So if you think about it, when you hire a woman, and this is not my theory, this is proven out by an economist, who won a Nobel Prize for this. When you hire women, they in turn take their income and invest it largely in education and healthcare, so not only are they contributing to the GDP from a compensation standpoint, taxation standpoint, they're investing in core infrastructure. And when they invest in education for their children, those children go on to contribute more meaningfully to the GDP. So people talk about bottom line companies, double bottom line companies, but investing in women tends to be a triple bottom line business case or an economic case. And then let's talk about what these women want, right? So I have two children who are grown up now. They're 18 and 15. But I entered the workforce, and as I continued working, the reality was I was as educated as my husband, which is true for most women. A lot of women now in the education system, when you look at the data at the school level, it is tending towards the 50-50 level. Women are having children later. My mom had me when she was 23. I had my kids when I was 30. So having children later also means you're more productive in the workforce. They're looking for equity in the household. They want to be contributors, and I think it's a financial requirement when you live in large cities. That it is a double income household. Raising children is expensive, but also the fact that in some of the fields like technology, if you take yourself out for 3 or 6 years, depending on how many children you have, you would, your skills become redundant, and hence it becomes very difficult to come back into the workplace. And financial emancipation, which is a sub theme of equity in the household, but more and more women want financial independence. And I think it makes for a healthier relationship at home and in society when a woman's financially emancipated. And then let's talk about the business case for employers. If I take all of this into play, you have a much more educated workforce that's graduating out of schools and colleges, and you can tap into them. They're having children later, which means that they're much more productive in the workforce. And the cost of rehiring and retraining somebody who's leaving the workforce, I would argue, is significantly higher than um, trying to give them childcare or access to support structures to come back. So the business case for employers has always been strong, and in some industries it is significantly higher. If you take a law firm as an example, STEM industries, but the business case stacks up pretty much in every employer. Part of the reason when I exited Clay and I moved to Bright Horizons was I wanted to continue doing this work to say how can that tripod of the employee, the employer, and the government play well together to ensure that there is more women workforce participation. What women want in the workforce, and I think this has been exacerbated through COVID, but one of the critical takeaways from I'm a half glass full sort of a person. I guess once you're an entrepreneur, you are like that. The reality is COVID created an opportunity because hybrid work came into force. There was adoption of technology. There was a significant acceptance to remote work. But typically, the reality is even before the pandemic, only 1 in 10 women wants to work mostly on site. This probably was, for 5 in 10 women. But once they've experienced the benefits of working remotely, this reduces, commute time and childcare needs. I'm doing a podcast which is launching in a couple of weeks, and our first guest was Indra Nui, and she made a very important point where she said that why isn't work designed around life? If school ends at 3 o'clock, uh, and you're expected to pick up your children, get their homework done, help them through day-to-day commitments, why does work go on till 5? So I think this notion of designing work around life is going to be an important inflection point, and this will be a huge opportunity for us to tap women back in the workforce. Women working in the office are 100 1.5, sorry, my slides are sort of flicking through quickly, to experience demeaning and other sort of macro aggression. The point is that the more in the context of what is going on, these are also benefits for employers to think through how how they can support women, tap women, and provide those social structures which are really critical for women. They're seeking commitment to well-being and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and uh, you know equal representation of the women in the workforce. Diversity has several meanings. It has, racial diversity, age diversity, LGBTQI diversity, but the gender diversity tends to be the first topic of discussion. Companies with more diverse teams are 21% likely to reach above average profitability, and that diversity in the thought process is really critical. So again, going back to the economic and business case, the diversity in the workforce is beneficial for companies. It is not just beneficial for the employees. Um, when you so when How can companies support this? I think a critical aspect of this is encouraging a better work-life balance. Employees, I have a firm belief, and I've been this biggest believer and proponent of this, is that employees have to be anchored. And this is not gender specific. It is gender neutral. People have to be anchored at home before they can be productive at work. If I have my mother ill, my father needing some support, my children having a PTM or an exam, all of this plays into how productive I am at work. And hence, the notion of saying how do we create support structures that allow people to be productive in the workplace. Providing flexibility such as remote or hybrid work, like I said, this becomes a great lever to try and attract what is an untapped workforce. Childcare options or on-site childcare. Working parents without consistent childcare are, nearly twice as likely to be unhappy at their job. And typically it's the woman. So 1 in 4 women stay in the job, 3 in 4 cite childcare as the reason they quit. If you look at the data, and I'm a data person in general, um, there are several inflection points at which you lose women in the workforce, childbirth being the highest. But it could be the fact that, women who are, one of my friends and clients at Infosys who had a DI for them, Aruna Newton, she had mentioned the fact that in the previous year, this was in 2020, they lost 5,000 women from the workforce because their children were going to 10th grade, and the 10th grade exam was a really critical point. That continues. It's the 12th grade exam. It is college entry. It is looking after an elder. It gets exasperated when there are children with special needs, single families. So there's a range of issues that we need to cater for. But the fact that, going back to the point that a person has to be anchored at home before they can be productive at work, is trying to understand what is that composition of what's a very varied definition of family, and how do we support that so that the employee can be productive at work. How do you create a culture that promotes inclusivity and safety? Employer benefits such as mental health care, and we have all seen mental health and well-being being part of the narrative. But again, if we examine the root causes of what's causing the mental health, I would argue that at the beginning of the pandemic, people were living at work, and I think it is now shifted to working from home. So you suddenly, had to take uh, your work responsibilities and your home responsibilities, and you were trying to merge them. There was no semblance of work-life balance. If anything, I think people are craving a little bit of work-life separation, and that effort is continued. The reality is that, unless you're supporting people from what is causing the mental health and well-being issues will continue. And then provide career trainings and planning. So formal career training opportunities. We hear organizations say people are their most important asset. But just taking that argument, from a from a financial standpoint, is to say, if you take a fixed asset register in an organization, you typically have some semblance of depreciation, ongoing maintenance, activities that you need to do. So where is the ongoing maintenance and thinking through? Here's someone who had a college degree and has come and has been productive in the workforce, has stepped away for 3 years because they had a child. how do we bring them back and invest in them so they're much more productive in the workforce. So I would say, the three levers that we've seen are upskilling, returnships, and support programs. I will spend a little time talking through this. I will maintain that access to high quality childcare is one of the things that will allow you to catch the big fall off at childbirth. But in addition to that, there are things that organizations need to do to support women coming back into the workforce. Um, Women supporting other women is one of the biggest levers. So helping women helping each other, coaching, mentoring, and providing tips is a great way for us to be our own force. So how do you also create a network and a network effect within the organization, such that women within the organization have a voice and are active proponents of bringing other women into the organization. On the upskilling, there are formal training programs, um, things like, if when I studied, I'm trained to be a computer engineer, but if I left the workforce at that point, the transition from being trained in a .NET environment to Microsoft moving to an Azure environment means you have a requirement for new skills, a new set of tools and techniques, and also a new peer group who's trained in that environment. So, what are these formal training programs, micro learnings, boot camps that can allow uh, employees to get trained? So, micro credentialing and badging, as again saying, take a 6-month course, is there a 4-week, 6-week course as you're planning returnship? On the job training, so the notion of saying how do I buddy you up with someone and get you trained up on the job, mentoring, creating, and this is not asking somebody to do this with the goodwill of their heart, creating formal mentorship programs where people take time out and are incented and are measured on actually taking the time out to women to mentor women who are returning back to the workforce. Volunteer, so which is the I will do this out of the goodwill of my heart, support somebody who's coming back into the workplace. So one is to tap into the goodwill, but second is create enough both incentives and motivations for people to want to do this. And then think about cross training. So, the job that somebody came into or left was taken up by someone else. They might have left for a period of time. That job might not have been relevant. Is there an opportunity to cross train them into adjacent job roles? So if somebody was in the contact center, customer service is their core strength. Are there other areas within the organization where customer service becomes really relevant and they can be cross-trained into those? Returnships, and Salesforce has a branded program around bringing women back to work. Companies are implementing this, and some of them are specifically working towards creating programs for bringing women back into the workforce. So their programs called very specifically bring women back to work, and this is for women who've taken extended career breaks. It could be as long as 15 or 16 years. This was something we did at Clay all the time. Was you left the workforce because you had a child. Um, this is a great opportunity for you to come back, be with your child. Think of this as a part-time career, but most of the women who joined us stayed on because they felt it was something that they were contributing back and enabling other women to come back to the work. But there are returnship programs both within organizations and outside of organizations. And some of the larger companies like Amazon, Goldman, and Pepsi offer return to work programs and returnships, not only to assist back into the workplace, but these include things like the upskilling programs, mentorships, the ability to create a cohort of people who are then being brought back. Think of this as an induction process. This is almost a reinduction process into the work. And the other support programs, I think, which are critical, we forget that the hiring manager has to be really clear on what was the motivation, Where did this person go? What are their strengths? Simple things like even resume writing, internal job application processes. Um, your resume tends to be, and today we're inundated, with with the great resignation, the great rehire. There's so many versions of it. The great returnship. Today we're seeing, tons of boomerangs across the board. The point is that the recruitment organization, even an internal recruitment organization, is inundated. And given that this is a first impression, uh, is there a possibility for you to support writing them back? It's confidence building for the woman who's coming back, but it's also a great way for them to position themselves for roles that are available both internally and externally. Interview prep, the process of interviewing can be stressful. You've been away, you've had a different job, which is looking after your child or looking after a loved one. How do you think about supporting them and saying, here's what you talked through, be confident about the break that you took. I think it's becoming more commonplace taking breaks. But the reality is, how do you talk through that phase, why it was important to you, why you were anchored at home and now you believe you can be truly productive at work, and advise and one-on-one prep for interviews, and webinars and workshops, support programs that offer workshops and webinars to help prepare you for returning to work. So it is a shift and a transition. I believe that our education system doesn't train us for three most important milestones. And I think that is the cause of mental health and well-being issues among employees. One is entering the workforce. The second is, being married. And a lot of us live for a very long time now. So the notion of being married to someone for 40 to 50 years or picking a partner is not something that you're trained for. And the third is having children. The third one, I would argue, is the most stressful because entering the workforce and getting married or picking a partner are very different dynamics. But when you have a child, you're suddenly becoming responsible for another human being in a marriage or in a partnership. You are, but you're not to the extent where you are when you have a child. So these are, aspects that we as employers have to think about and say, how do we actually prepare people? Just as you're being really thoughtful about your induction programs, be really thoughtful about your reinduction program. And then, I say this, and this is something that I advocate with employers for as long as I've been in the space. To have equity in the workforce, employers need to consider inequity in benefits. My needs as a woman are different. My motivations as a woman are different. The expectations of me as a woman are different. So the fact is that if you want to bring me back into the workforce, you have to think about what are the supports that I as a woman need, as against thinking about it as how do I become equitable in the workforce and provide the exact same benefits to men and women. It is great when we support both, but the notion of thinking about every benefit as equitable across the organization is a flawed one. We have to think just like we think about customer value propositions and um, customer buying processes. I think organizations need to think about employee value propositions and employee buying processes. Why should I work for you as an employer? What are my needs and how are you meeting them? So with that, I will, take any questions that you might have. Been speaking at you, and I'd love to have a conversation through this process.
Thank you, Priya. I think we have some questions. Let me relay them to you. This is a fairly long question from Mr. Amol Nigam, and his question is: the women who are trying to get back to profession are mostly treated by the companies as someone needy and don't want to explore the set of skills and the difference that the woman can create. And even if she expects a higher remuneration than what she was drawing last, why are the most organizations don't work on this rather than going for unmarried women, ignoring the experienced ones? Thank you, Amol.
So and that is where the business case conversations. Thank you for the question, Amol. The business case conversation comes from that, which is somebody whose experience has more value. When you think of people as a cost, as against thinking of them as an asset, the conversation changes dramatically. So somebody who has worked and has been productive in the workforce, their value is significantly higher than someone who's net new. Because we all have to agree, nothing in my computer engineering skills were great and they helped me tremendously to become a logical thinker. They didn't prepare me for my first role in consulting. I learned pretty much everything on the job and through seniors and mentorship, etc. So but getting employers to think about this as a business case is really critical. And as far as the a woman coming back and expecting to be paid at the same level or at a higher level, that is something that women need to be trained on and hiring managers need to be trained on, which is to say, please consider both her experience, uh, but also what is right in terms of pay equity. I think some countries have done a lot of work, even the US where I now live. Pay equity is not a reality. A woman gets paid 82 cents to a dollar to a man, but the fact is transparency is becoming more critical. And so the more transparent organizations become and the more the government plays a role in terms of saying what are men paid versus women, what are entry level jobs versus senior roles, or people who've had experience in the job, those things matter. But there isn't one magic bullet, which is why I tried to outline this set of things that can be done. I apologize, it's slightly cold here. But at the core of it, it's also the woman feeling that she needs to come back to work. That's one part of the equation. How the employer responds to that, how not just the employer, but people within the employer's organization respond to that, how the employer thinks about this whole conundrum, which is why I talked about the economic case upfront as well as the business case. And that's the narrative we collectively have to change if you have to make a difference.
Thank you, Priya. We have two other questions. One is related to, I mean, both are related to women employees for sure. One is related to the fact that, a lot of times women want to try their entrepreneurial, ventures, right? So they go out and they try their entrepreneurial, ventures. And maybe after a certain time, maybe either because of the success or in some cases failure as well, they want to come back to the workforce. I mean, typical corporate world, and they want to be, in the mainstream corporate world. But then the acceptance rate seems to be not so encouraging. That's one. The second one is that when it comes to what you call lateral placement kind of thing, either within the company or in the industry, what we get to see is that while men get quite a lot of opportunities, they get to the second, third layers because they've done a program, or they've taken a sabbatical and come back. But again, there seems to be some resistance there as well. So I mean, in your experience, right, maybe with colleagues or the place where you work, did you happen to see any best practice where, these two things are being addressed very effectively, Priya?
So please remind me of the first one, which is
when the people, the women,
people go on entrepreneurial breaks and
exactly.
come back.
Yeah.
So again, I think it's a mind shift, both for the person who's done the entrepreneurial venture and the person who's hiring. So a lot of what I will say is mindset shifts in general. Um, there is no shame in failure. I think some of our best lessons are learned through failure. If anything, we set up. So this has been something I've been very conscious with our boys. Both Sanjay and I, my husband's also an entrepreneur. I was an entrepreneur, but we spoke as much about our failures as we did about our successes. Because if your benchmark at home is around saying only success is valued and failure is not valued, then it becomes that's what is seen as the route to success. But actually, the lessons you learn, the lesson I learned from losing my first deal, the lesson I learned from not getting the first interview job that I got, all of these were more valuable lessons, I would argue, than the ones that I learned through the process of actually succeeding. So the individual has to be able to present that as saying, yes, I took, but it takes courage. It takes a lot of gumption to say, I'm going to leave and I say this for myself, I had a very cushy job in the UK. Both my kids were there, my sister lived there, my parents were not in India. It takes a lot of courage to say, I'm going to shut shop and go and try something new. Even though India is home, the bottom line was that it was a completely new area. So positioning it as the fact that, you've actually taken that leap of faith and done something, and hence you as an individual are significantly more valuable than somebody who will not test those
Right.
comfort zones, is important, and employers bearing that in their mind, and being creative about saying, this didn't work out, but guess what? If you put me in uncharted territory within the organization, chances are I'm likely to be more successful than somebody who's not been tested. So that's part one of it. In terms of roles, you know, again, it's a longer drawn question, but some of the best practices I would say is when mentorship programs actually work with an organization. So if you're, a high potential talent, it is both on the individual and the organization. So the individual has to seek out this other women who have succeeded. So in Bright Horizons, I maybe it was the way I was raised, but I never thought of myself as a woman entrepreneur. I didn't, I thought of myself as an entrepreneur, and my husband was an entrepreneur. But the fact that I was a woman entrepreneur, a lot of people reached out to me. And in the US, as I took on this role, a lot of people said, you're not only a woman, you're a woman of color. And that was a really important narrative. So taking that responsibility for people who have these glass ceilings, artificial ceilings, cement ceilings, whatever that version is, seeking women, uh, who have been successful in the organization, asking them, how did you navigate this? And employers can create, ERGs, employee resource groups, where these women can talk about it. So I'm the executive sponsor of a group called the Professional Women at Work. And a lot of this is we meet monthly, we talk about, what are the challenges that they're facing, and training and talking about specific issues about being confident, asking for more, um, ensuring that HR is coming along on that plan, is all of these are important aspects. And I would say it's simple, small steps that allow, people to navigate this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And since you're mentioning about, I think in your presentation as well as around, in a few minutes back, Priya, about mentoring. Now, I think one of the good things that we get to see in some companies, of course, in India, we get to see not many companies, but yes, in it's just sprouting as such. And that is the idea of reverse mentoring, right? And especially from the younger generation or the so-called Gen Zers or millennials, right? And then they're the people who actually end up mentoring the senior people, and that's how they want to prepare the companies for the future, because as much as the way the senior people will have their heart in the securing the future for the company, the younger lot definitely will have much more, because they're investing emotionally and otherwise as well. So therefore, what is your experience of reverse mentoring, Priya?
I think reverse mentoring starts at home. I've always believed that, I've learned a lot more from my children than I
Right,
know about the world.
right,
I also think there is a self-assuredness. So it's a conundrum for me when I watch younger people, millennials and Gen Z specifically. There is a sense of incredible self-assuredness, knowing exactly what they want, where they want to head, but also at the same time a lack of belonging in terms of saying, how do I find a company that has purpose, and um, what is the reason I exist, and how do I contribute in a meaningful way to the world? Reverse mentoring in my mind is something we should have done several years ago. Like I
right.
said, I to every extent that I talk to my children, I hope they talk back to me and tell me, here's how the world's changing around you, mom. Did you not know this was going on? So I do believe this has always been a two-way conversation. It is not somebody who's been there, done that. It is, if I talk about my time in employment 18 years ago when I was a young mom, it is in a very different context. So understanding the context of what somebody who's entering the workforce now is, and what her motivations are, and what she's struggling with, and what she aspires to might be very different from me. So that is why I think about it as a two-way conversation. Where the mentoring comes from is sometimes it is about tiding over. So what feels like a very arduous time when you have children, and there seems to be all this societal pressure, all this mum guilt that you have, the reality is it lasts for a period of
Exactly.
time, before which it goes away. So it's also about having someone who can say, "You've got this. This will pass." But try and tide through it during that period of time. So I think there's value in both. And
Absolutely. Thank you. I think maybe two more questions, Priya, before we end up. One is related definitely to the work-life balance, because when it comes to the men, generally, when you look at their work-life balance, largely comes from the support system that they can fall back on the women at home, and as well as right in the larger ecosystem that they have. But when it comes to women, right? So therefore, do you think they would have the same the ecosystem? Because I remember very vividly at some point at one of the lectures, Indra Nui said, and also she quoted in her book, saying that actually work-life balance is some sort of misnomer, in the sense that it's very difficult to have it, because either you choose, you can't have either this or that, but somewhere you need to prioritize, and therefore you need to chase that. So that's what her very strong point of view, that it's very difficult to imagine that somebody can actually chase a work-life balance, because either you can have best of the work, or at the cost, not at the cost, but again, I think the prioritization come in. But again, from your experience, having traveled all over the world and having worked with the different corporate settings, what has been your experience, or your advice for having that, especially for women, the work-life balance, Priya?
So I don't believe in work-life balance. There is always some compromise. There is the thing is that you have to learn to integrate work and life. So I believe in work-life integration more than work-life balance. If I'm at a board meeting and my child has a PTM, you have to be, you can't be 50-50. There is no world in which you
Exactly.
can split yourself into two parts. So you have to commit to one or the other. When you're at the PTA, you have to say, that's fine. This is what I chose to do. This is really, really important because my child's struggling in school. Or when you're at the board meeting, you don't think about the judgment of the other mothers who might be at the PTA, and you're the only mom who hasn't turned up. So this uh, practice of, again, this feels the most things in life are simple. They're not necessarily simplistic, right? So
Absolutely.
the formulas are simple, but implementing them is difficult. And this starts at home. So I don't believe in the fact that uh, men get it easier than women if there is equity in the household. My husband contributes to more than enough, and I don't think I would have been a successful person if he didn't, right? So, and we play to our strengths. If I tried teaching my children to bike or cycle, I would have taken a month. I would have put the trainer wheels, I would have taken them off, I would have then taken the other one off. He taught them in 10 minutes each, right? So where you also find these balances is really critical. And the world is changing, and I'm very hopeful. I mean, I'm raising two very feminist boys, and I know there are enough moms who are raising incredibly feminist women, girls. And that's not a terrible thing, because when we think about the world from a feminist point of view, you will think about equity. You will think about not celebrating one day in the year as Women's Day. You will think about every day as Women's Day, right? So, but that starts at the household. And I think that, from a reverse mentoring standpoint, I would love young women to tell me how they do this and navigate this with their partners. And I think that has shifted a lot, India and world over.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think one last question before we end up this session is: I think in the last 2 months, I think what the world has witnessed is a very phenomenal I would say outpour of either concern or appreciation for what New Zealand Prime Minister and Jacinda, and the way she has demeaned her office, and everybody appreciated for her candid and the candor in terms of the fact that I think having led from the front, especially during very crucial times during COVID and other place incidents at New Zealand. But I think the way she has demeaned office and she has admitted openly that, I think I don't want to get into the burnout any further. I think now it's time for other leader to take over and then start running the country. And I think what everybody appreciated is the fact that there's a limit. And everybody is vulnerable. There's nothing wrong in that. But the way she has admitted and that she demeaned office and handed over the reins to somebody else in her party, I think that was absolutely appreciated. By the same token, I think you were mentioning about the failures also, sometime back, Priya. So how good or how easy is it for someone to admit mistake or a failure, saying that, yeah, I mean, that's what it is. But again, from the point of view of the larger society, maybe, they get branded, that's how I think somewhere we become, there's a stigma out there. So again, from your point of view, what would be the right way to accept and to prepare oneself? Because beyond a point, we may not be able to take it, right? I mean, everybody is vulnerable at some level. Again, from your experience, what would be your best advice to people who want to admit and then move on, Priya?
I think look around yourself, and if we as a society and community could survive 6 months of lockdown at home when COVID started, could deal with Delta, could deal with everything that was thrown back at us, and then come back hopeful and wanting more. I think the lessons are right there, which is we as human beings are resilient and we have an innate ability to pick ourselves up and move forward. It is being convinced that you do have that, because in the moment, failure always, or that notion of having a setback, I would never call anything a failure. It's a setback and it's an opportunity to learn. Doesn't feel that way. But wisdom of hindsight, everything that our parents have told us, everything I tell my children is that, these setbacks you can tide over, and there is something that is out there which is significantly better. The fact that you fail, or the fact that you can rise up and move forward, is a very internal decision you have to make. I think that was the dissonance I was talking about. Externally, uh, for me, the younger generation feels a lot more self-assured, but the need for validation, and that's amplified through things like social media, where you put something out and you want everyone to like it. We put out a perfect version of our lives. Everyone's doing it, so you feel like, if I'm the only one who's imperfect. But you will also see when a Sonam Kapoor puts her face on without makeup, that is valued significantly as well. So it is, should you be the breakaway or should you wait for somebody else to do it? And I would always say, uh, do it like toddlers do it. If you look at a 2-year-old, they will always test the boundaries. They will want to touch the electrical point. They would want to touch that light because of the fact that somebody
Yes.
said no, and they're constantly testing boundaries. Once they've experienced it, they never do it. So it's a bit like that. I mean, how do we remind ourselves of those behaviors we had as children, that we were always willing to test the boundaries and then said, okay, that didn't work for me and I'll move on to the next thing. It's just that then as we grow up, we need all this validation around us, and it's just finding that innate thing.
Thank you so much, Priya. I think I must end with end with one interesting one. Today we had this global business summit, which is conducted by the Economic Times in India, where we had the pleasure of hosting entire Indian cabinet, right from Honorable Prime Minister and everyone over the last 2 days. And today
My husband was there.
yeah,
He was
and,
there. He was
and
at the Global Business Summit for the past 2 days. So Sanjay
very
was.
good. Okay. And we have, our CEO had the pleasure of having a conversation with the LBS Dean that, your alumni, Priya. So I must tell you, I mean, it was very interesting. Although it was very brief, but, it was basically a discussion with him on disruption in higher education. It was with him today afternoon around 2:30 actually. And since you are from the alumni of the very illustrious business school, I thought I must share with you. But once again, thank you so much, Priya, for your time, especially in the morning, and appreciate all of your thoughts. And hopefully, and I'm sure all the things that you have said, it becomes very soon the agenda of Indian Inc. and rest of the world as well. But definitely, I think we're looking forward to some of them are very, very progressive ideas, and I'm sure they'll get into the lexicon very soon. And once again, thank you so much from all of us at TimesPro, Priya.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.